Hey everybody, welcome to episode 161, a special one because it's a little bit different than the first time we're going to have a look at this. We have been tracking some stats now recently in the last maybe year or so of particular fights, and I think it's time to have a look at some trends and some things that we've been noticing, particularly from the World Championships. So we're going to have a look at four fights that we had a look at so far, and just maybe come back and revisit this in the future to see is there any difference or any other trends that are starting to develop. And I'm sure there's some things you noticed that maybe are very, very important and keys to ITF sparring, which you haven't been putting importance on before. So that's the plan for today's video. We're going to get right into it, have a look at the first fight that we had a look at in terms of our statistics and analysis, and have a little chat through it. So this was a fight from a couple of episodes back. I think that was episode maybe 157 possibly. Magomed and Yanger from the World Championships in Sweden. Sorry, in Finland.
In Finland, yeah. So looking at the Swedish flag, you can understand how we get that one confused. But
Yeah.
you know, we have quite a contrasting one in this one. So we were looking at a few different things. We're looking at what shots are being thrown. We're looking at how people are using their various weapons that are available to them and the rate at which they're being thrown as well. And then in some ways, we'll also look at the contact. So like how efficient are people being in terms of when they choose to make an action, how efficient are they being in terms of getting into contact and potentially getting a score off of that. So one of the things that I think we noticed in general was just how prevalent that front leg carry can be across
Mm-hmm.
all of the matches that we've looked at so far. There's been quite a bit of use of that front leg carry. One thing that was really surprising in this one was that we had Magomed with the side kick off the front leg as a direct attempt to score or attempt to create distance or whatever with the side kick, rather than the more general carry. The side kick was more prevalent, and we have spotted a pattern. We saw that as well with James, and we'll show James too. We'll show you that in a second. But this was the first kind of time that we'd seen. Oh, okay, front leg carry. We know that's being used a lot more. But Magomed is using the side kick very purposefully and very deliberately at the same rate as that front leg carry, and that was interesting.
Yeah, and we have 9 shots listed here as well on this graphic, so we can see there's generally, I know there's some things that cross over, but generally we have 9 variations of shot selection that these guys are using as well in this one. So if we go a little bit deeper then into the story behind this fight, we can see there's some more numbers behind it as well. So here we can see that Magomed attempted 50 shots and Jahangir attempted 39. So that brings us down towards the end there, just before the yellow bar. We can see one action every 4.8 seconds for Magomed
Yeah.
and one action every 6.15 seconds for Jahangir, which is of the higher numbers we've seen so far. And we have a theory at the moment. We'll see it how it progresses with more fights that we'll delve into. But the higher the weight category, the lower the action rate will be. So there'll be a bigger number in terms of the seconds between every action. So we can see already that we'll see later on the 57s a lot more lively.
Yeah, definitely. I think what's also quite interesting is to start to look at these as well. We will start looking at the contact rate, or that the amount of shots thrown, how efficiently they get into contact. And we're looking at that 30% rate here with these guys. And you will see that some individuals might have a lower number of attempts, but a higher rate of success in terms of getting into contact. And right now, we can't say, is there a sweet spot? But we are
Yeah.
definitely seeing that. Uh, when you look at who is the more active across the pairs or across the matches, it generally pays to be the person who is more active and making more attempts. And we pick that soccer analogy of the more shots on goal, the chances are when you look at enough matches, the more goals that are scored. And we're seeing this. Um,
Yeah. So
Also
far
in
from the
this
four
one,
fights, Adrian, as
yeah,
well, we've noticed that. I know 4 fights isn't a massive sample, but it
oh yeah,
has shown us that the person generally with the more attempts won the fights.
yeah.
So they might not always have the highest contact rate, but generally in these 4 fights in particular, anyway, they have all won the fight if they had the higher attempted rate.
So we jump over next into the match between Shimon Denisovitz from England and James Tuke from Ireland. And we're seeing again, we referenced it in the previous one where James's sidekicks and carries are very equal. And the amount of time he comes into contact with the sidekick is quite high relative to the number of shots thrown. Whereas we can see with Shimon, just a little bit different in terms of the balance. There's not nearly as much side kick in there, and more of the work is done with that front leg carry.
Yeah, we see the shot selection is a little smaller here with this one compared to other samples as well.
Yeah,
Trying single and maybe doubles in particular shots, but generally they're looking at the solid techniques that we all have and use. The Dalia Chagi, the turning kick variations are definitely making a comeback. We've noticed that it hasn't been as prevalent in maybe like the last 5 to 10 years. It's been a lot of front leg stuff, but a lot of back leg turning kick and variations of that as well off the front leg are
yeah,
coming back into play. And we do see as well the hands are not being as effective for some people. So as a result, they can be a little lower, which as well plays into that fact that we always say if you're going to have your style based on being a puncher, you have to have your work rate very, very high, because all it takes is one head kick for you to have 3 attempts wasted or at least level. So you need to
yeah.
really have a really high output there. The back fist is something, the singular back fist is also something we have seen come back into the game a little bit. Not as prevalent in this particular fight, but is in
Very much
others.
just a flavor shot. It's in
Yeah.
there every now and again, sneaks in there. But I think what you will see is that there are a couple of shots that a person either has and they use, or they don't. And we can see this with the
Mm.
hacks. It's not in Shimon's toolkit, not one that he uses, where he might be more inclined to use the back kick, for example. Not in this case, but it often happens that a
Yeah.
person has a particular shot, or it's only present right versus right. It's not present right versus left, for example.
Yeah, we'll
Um,
also probably see as we go through, like if you're not cancelling people out with your same shots, or side kick versus front leg carry or whatever, that if someone really has a grip on the fight, and maybe let's say for example they're really good with the side kick, then the other person will probably have attempts quite high at solutions to that. So maybe it's the
yeah,
Goro, maybe it's the Bande, and we can kind of see that here for Blue, for Shimon. He has a couple of attempts at the Bande to kind of come up with a solution for James's front leg. So
and
we will
quite a
see that
few
as
on the
well. They
dolio as
will play.
well.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So in terms of their work rate, we can see in this case 42 attempts for Shimon, 69 for James. So it's very much looking like James is doing more work, and the accuracy is very, very similar across the two guys. I think
Hmm.
on this one, Richie, that the very last stat is probably the most important. Again, it's like in that 1.5 times, slightly more in this case, 1.5 times the work rate from James to Shimon, and that does seem to tell across the 4 fights that we've been looking at for sure.
Yeah, and this one actually has the highest discrepancy between two fighters as well.
Okay.
So that shows as well that James was actually quite comfortable in this one, I think, when we watched it back. So go check out that full episode if you haven't. But although the accuracy, we call contact rate, whatever way you want to say it, is very similar, because the attempts are much higher from James, he had much more success there. As you can see, one shot every 3.48 seconds, where one shot every 5.7. But we are highlighting now that you do need to be working hard in ITF Taekwondo if you want to be successful. If you're just going to have a very low work rate, you need to be very, very clinical and effective if you want to be able to progress through. So we are seeing a little bit of a trend. The higher the work rate and the more shots you attempt, the more success you're likely to have.
So taking that to the extreme, we have this match between Yassine from Spain and Finn from Ireland, where we have an absolutely ludicrous work rate, both in terms of number of attempts and also the number that made contact.
Yeah. So this is a crazy one. So great fight. Definitely watch that back if you haven't. But we see clinical again from Finn with particular shots, where Yazine had a little bit of flavor of them all. You see a lot more general yellow bars floating around there, where Finn kind of has his select few shots and he likes to be very clinical with those then in particular. But insane work rate in this particular one. Again, the legs doing most of the work. We do have a theory, and it probably does make sense that the lower the weight category, the more actions that we will see.
Yeah.
And that's what we've seen so far in these ones as well, which incredible one action every 2.58 and 2.78 seconds, which is insane. And Finn with an attempted 93 shots in 4 minutes, which is really, really high. As we can see from the bottom, there's one action. So we have the 1.08 attempted for Yazine, which is, they're not what we're really talking about there essentially, but it is very, very close with the amount of work rate they're matching each other with.
Yeah.
And that showed because
Action
this
for
fight
action.
came down to the wire and actually went to a draw and also golden point. So it shows that because the work rate was matched by both fighters, it came down to just getting those extra warnings and a little bit more clinical with particular shots, maybe head kicks versus body kicks and punches is the difference then on the scorecard.
Yeah, there's definitely something to be said though on this one from at those higher work rates, obviously people are going to fall or exit a little bit more often or end up in
Yeah.
clinches. So we have more restarts, but and the restarts should slow the match down because they each take a few seconds. There's going to be 4 or 5 seconds for each of these restarts. But still, even with like if we took it that there was 4 seconds, that's 80 seconds gone in restarts, out of the
Yeah,
240.
that's
That
actually a good point.
so the work rate within that time is even higher. And then still, when you look at it, that for Yassine and Finn, they both have an action every, less than 3 seconds. So that's two actions
It's
for the
insane.
match in total in 3 seconds for the entire duration of the match. So yeah, just to kind of wrap your head around it,
Incredible.
that's a lot of going.
Just for people watching as well who may not be aware of videos we've done like this before, when we say contact made, essentially means that you kind of came into contact with a technique. Doesn't mean that you scored it per se
Yeah,
or you got a return for it. It just means that you made contact with whatever technique. Attempted means
mm,
you tried it and it was you did make contact and that's recorded as you can see, or it was against fresh air, let's call it. I think that's
yeah.
the easy way to put it. The accuracy, we do call that contact rate now. So just so people are aware of the term, so you can get a little bit more understanding of the numbers.
And then we stayed within that division this week, and we had a look at another Spaniard, Doyle, up against Ergashev from Uzbekistan, and we saw a really big variation. But we can see, like for me, the story of this one is that like there's two. There's that top bar where we look at the carry, and then there's the 360s and bad days. But in that top bar, we can see that Ergashev is using that carry not to really pressure a score, but to create movement and maybe
Mm-hmm.
create a little space. There's almost no return on that carry in terms of making a contact with it. It's not going to be a scoring shot, but it is allowing him to do things like the next one, which is the 360 or the bande. So once there's a little space created, it opens the opportunity to spin. And that was really a very interesting difference where when you look at almost all of the other bars, the guys are very, very, very similar. Slightly more in Doyle's favor in terms of blitz, but almost everything else is
Yeah.
much the same. Um, but this gives us a chance to look within a division. Again, these are all 57s. What was the work rate in total compared to Yassine and Finn?
Yeah, not as high is the answer, but still quite impressive compared to some of the other divisions.
Yeah,
So we do see that there is one action every 3.24 seconds and one action every 4.71. But Doyle had a much higher contact rate with his shot selection. As you said, probably a big factor there as well is Ergashev is creating movement with his front leg carries a lot of the
yeah,
time and using that to gain some momentum with some spinning techniques and things like that. He's the first guy we've ever seen that has more spinning shots than a side kick attempt. So
true.
definitely a little bit of an enigma there as well. But we have the same standard 14 restarts, something that we expect in most fights. And other than that, all the numbers there aren't too crazy apart from the very last one where we have the second highest difference of a 1.45 versus every one shot that Doyle attempted. So a little bit of a discrepancy there. And we see then as a result, Ergashev got the nod in this fight. So if you can match your opponent and then you're a little bit more clinical with your contact rate, it shows that you're having yourself in a good position to potentially win the fight. But if you're not matching the work rate of your opponent, you're kind of putting yourself at a big hill to climb no matter what happens, whether it's warnings, whether it's the scores, it doesn't matter. If you're not matching the work rate at least, it is a big hill to climb.
Yeah, now the proviso is we have a lot more matches to go through, and we're going to keep working these stats and seeing how this stacks up over time. But so far, we haven't seen someone with a lower work rate win. And the one fight that we've had where the work rate was almost equivalent, to guys were 50-50 on their work rate, i.e., Finn and Yassine, it did end up in a draw.
Yeah.
So at the very early stages of us starting to analyze this, we are seeing a bit of a correlation between having a higher work rate than your opponent, whatever the division happens to be, and having a favorable outcome. A similar work rate to your opponent being a draw, or drawee, if you like it, it's heading towards a
Mm-hmm.
draw, and a lower work rate than your opponent leading to being defeated. And especially when you go and layer warnings on top of that, we always knew that the work rate was important, but we didn't have a body of stats on it. We have got quite a few stats on the warnings, and we know we don't want to go above 5. Typically, that leads to losing matches more often. But as we're looking at it here, we can see where, okay, what we can start to extrapolate what's the interplay between work rate and warnings. So, is there a sweet spot in terms of, we could see that the higher the work rate was, the more warnings came about for both fighters as well, the more restarts there were. So is there a case of, can you outwork a
Yeah.
bad warning control? Maybe you can, maybe you can't. Maybe it's like, can you outwork a bad diet? The conventional wisdom on that is no, your diet's got to be good. But in this case, can you outwork bad warning control? We don't know yet.
Yeah, we've seen Finn in the fight we looked at with him and Yazin slightly get away with it because he was a bit more clinical with head techniques, which is obviously the
Yeah,
highest value score of 3 points, because he did have 12 warnings. So that is something to be aware of as well. If you do have that magic weapon of 3 point techniques to use at will, then you might get away with it a little bit more. But yeah, it is very interesting. Also, next week we're going to have a look at somebody in the female divisions, and we do notice a big difference so far. Now, maybe a theory, but worth keeping an eye on, because we do suspect that the work rate is much lower and not as many actions per second. So that's something to keep an eye on as well, to see if there's difference between. We always believed there was differences in the male and female game with
yeah.
technique selection and different things like that, but now we're seeing a little bit more behind it as well. Now, we're not mathematicians or statisticians or anything like that. We're just trying to make it interesting, put some numbers behind some fights, and hopefully come up with some new learnings to improve everybody's understanding of ITF sparring, to push it on for everybody so we can all get better, improve, and drive the game on, essentially.
Exactly that. So, folks, let us know what you thought of that. If there's any interesting takeaways that you found within the numbers that we didn't already call out, let us know. And maybe that's something that we can watch into the future as well. Really looking forward to doing more of this over the coming months and getting a lot more stats from a lot more matches so that we can find out what's actually relevant. And in a Moneyball style, let's see if this can influence how we coach and what we have our competitors do in the ring.
Yeah, definitely. All right, guys. So tune in next week for our first look at some of the females and see where their stats stack up. And make sure you subscribe so you can get us on your channel real fast. And until then, we'll catch you in the next one.
Bye now.